Good morning, Lieutenant. This is the man that shot me. He fancies me like mad. Perhaps it is the apron.
Imagine if I told you that one of Britain's favorite wartime sitcoms could never have lasted under the cancel culture of today. In the 1980s, Allo Allo was the jewel in the crown of British sitcoms, a laugh-out-loud spoof of life during wartime in occupied France, with offbeat characters, witty wisecracks, and preposterous events. It was a show that dared to poke fun at the most terrifying chapter of the 20th century and somehow managed to make audiences laugh. But hidden in its run was a scene so infamous, so controversial, that it is still whispered about today as the reason some fans believe the show could never continue. What really happened behind that fateful moment? Grip your berets tightly, for this is the tale of Allo Allo, the show that made war, courtesy of Hitler, funny, broke every conceivable rule, and yet managed to pull it all off until it did not. The dawn of comedy mayhem, it was 1982, and two British comedy writers, Jeremy Lloyd and David Croft, already renowned for their off-color workplace comedy, Are You Being Served?, had a notion so bold it sounded like career suicide. Produce a sitcom based on Nazi-occupied France. In an era when World War II was still fresh in the minds of older generations, a show based on such a premise seemed risky, even sacrilegious. But Lloyd and Croft knew something important, that occasionally the most risky ideas result in the best television. Allo Allo burst onto BBC screens on a premise that could have been guaranteed not to work. It was based in the fictional French town of Neuvien, somewhere in the midst of the war, and concerned René Artois, a cowardly cafe proprietor who finds himself caught between German occupiers, the French resistance, and his own roving eye for the waitresses employed by him. In contrast to the serious war dramas of the period, Allo Allo reversed all of that. Rather than grim realism, it provided viewers with fumbling German officers, inept resistance fighters, and a cast of farcical caricatures who fumbled through complicated plots with comedic ridiculousness. The show did not shy from stereotypes, it used stereotypes as its whole premise. German officers used to say VOT instead of what the French butchered English in silly fashions, and the British pilots sounded like upper-class twits who were mad about tea. The wit was that the satire hit across every nationality on an equal basis. No one was exempt. At a time when political correctness was still on the horizon, Allo Allo was allowed to satirize anyone and did so with impunity. Pushing boundaries in the 1980s, since it started, the show blew apart what was acceptable for mass British comedy. Double entendres, sexual innuendo, and farcical misunderstandings formed its comedy. René's serial affairs with his waitresses were not a secret subplot. They were integral to the comedy, frequently driving entire narratives. Food was another tool for suggestive humor, as were sausages and knockwurst used as humorous metaphors that frequently had parents scrambling for the remote control while the kids remained none the wiser. But the most risky move was to satirize the Nazis themselves. Only a few decades since the war, when the occupation and atrocities were still very much within living memory, Allo Allo featured German officers as art-loving numbskulls. Colonel von Strom and Captain Gearing were thieving idiots more concerned with smuggling pilfered paintings than fighting war. Even the fearsome Gestapo officer Herr Flick was demoted to a leathery caricature with a ridiculous infatuation with René. The resistance was also ridiculed. Michelle Du Bois of the French resistance presented her proposals with the catchphrase line, "Listen very carefully, I shall say this once," before revealing plans so absurd they approached parody. Death, killings, and torture were weighed with near carelessness, reducing war's darkest aspects to the stuff of farce. By today's standards, the stuff would be unthinkable. But within the more relaxed environment of comedy in the 1980s, the tightrope act between humor and terror was regarded as daring genius. Casting genius and catchphrases. Casting was key to the show's success. Gordon Kaye's René was a lesson in cowardly charm, constantly attempting to save his own neck while running off several mistresses. Carmen Silvera as Edith Artois served up cringingly terrible singing performances that became legendary. Richard Gibson's flick imparted the Gestapo man with just the right amount of menace and silliness, solidifying him as one of British comedy's greatest one-off villains. The writing for the show was supported by catchphrases that became unforgettable. Good moaning by Officer Crabtree was a part of British comedy lore, next to lines such as, "You stupid woman," and "I was pissing by the door when I heard two shats." They went beyond the show itself and became a part of British culture in a manner that few comedies have achieved before or since. Rumors, reality, and the myth of cancellation. For decades, there has been a popular rumor going around that Allo Allo was abruptly dropped due to a specific inflammatory episode or scene that went too far. Accounts have varied from tasteless jokes about the Holocaust to a missing episode considered offensive enough not to be shown. But the reality is much more mundane. The show was never axed due to scandal. It ran its natural course, concluding in December 1992 after 9 series and 84 episodes. The finale, A Winkle in Time, gave the story a proper send-off. By that point, the creators felt they had taken the characters and jokes as far as they could go. After a decade, they wanted to bow out before the show overstayed its welcome. Nevertheless, myths of censorship continue, in part due to offstage intrigue. Richard Gibson, who played flick, quit the series before the end, and his character was replaced by a recasting with David Janssen. The fans conjectured that his exit suggested scandal, although actually it was because of creative disputes and availability. The real-life car accident of Gordon Kaye in 1990 also hung over the subsequent seasons, with his recovery becoming a real issue for the future of the show. Why it could never be made today? Were someone to pitch Allo Allo today, they'd probably be laughed out of the meeting room, or, worse, be accused of insensitivity before the script had even been read out. In today's climate of increased cultural sensitivity, stereotype sensitivity, and social media indignation, the show's use of caricature would be greeted with immediate outrage. Each and every character pushed into caricatured stereotypes. Germans as sausage-gorging incompetents, the French as fumbling romanticists, the British as dim aristocrats. Renee's cheating would be interpreted not as humorous pranksterism, but as workplace harassment. Her flick's veiled homosexuality would be considered as perpetuating offensive LGBTQ+ stereotypes. Even the language jokes, based on ridiculous accents and mispronunciations, would be faulted for ridiculing entire cultures. Aside from the stereotyping, the flippant handling of war, trauma executions, and collaboration would be criticized for reducing suffering. Social media campaigns would organize boycotts, sponsors would withdraw support, and streaming services would quietly remove the show from their lists. In the current #MeToo, post-cancel culture climate, Allo Allo would never have been permitted to be aired in its original form. The complicated legacy, and yet, all the fuss notwithstanding, Allo Allo is still one of Britain's favorite sitcoms. Its legacy on the world of comedy is unquestionable. It showed that audiences would laugh at taboo subjects if handled with humor and irreverence. The catchphrases still endure, being regurgitated by fans years later, and the DVD box sets continue to fly off the shelves. Its legacy is ambivalent, though. Many of the younger fans who grew up on the show now identify its problematic aspects. Scholars cite it as an example of how comedy both reflects and constructs social attitudes, notably in regard to stereotypes and the collective memory. For some, the show is a purging way of dealing with trauma. For others, it mocks suffering. Abroad, the response was divided. German viewers were initially resistant to the show, but secret bootlegs made it a hit before its official release. In France, veterans were offended by the incompetent handling of the resistance, while others praised it as a way to laugh through the trauma. Jewish groups in a number of countries complained about its flippant approach to Nazi occupation. In Australia, it was a phenomenon prompting classroom and university debates on the morality of laughing at war. Behind the scenes, off-camera, there was drama on the show too. Gordon Kaye's 1990 accident came very close to ending his career and the show. Carmen Silvera, on the contrary to her nasal character Edith, was a helpful friend during his convalescence. Richard Gibson's exit over her flick's character progression caused waves among the fanbase. Scripts and costumes often conflicted with BBC censors, particularly the more salacious innuendos and the more revealing waitress uniforms. There were even rumors of cancelled crossovers such as a one with Dad's Army, which could have become TV legends had they been fulfilled. The behind-the-scenes chaos matched the on-screen farce, giving another twist to the show's rich history. Too hot for TV. Not all ideas survived the BBC. Deportation scripts were cancelled as too bleak, and those with actual historical figures were dispatched by the legal department. Scenes that were just too risque or suggestive got pruned prior to broadcast, and in syndication, nations such as Germany sometimes completely deleted her flick, leaving gaping plot holes. These behind-the-scenes deletions stoked rumors that the series was censored into oblivion. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. The truth about its ending. After all the speculation, the reality is straightforward. Allo Allo came to an end not through scandal, but because the writers chose to end it. 10 years was long enough, and the writers felt they had made their point. The face of comedy was changing towards alternative comedy and political satire, making stereotype-led farce seem old-fashioned. Stopping production in 1992 meant that it could stay in the viewer's affections as a much-loved classic and not a worn-out relic. Conclusion: judging the past by today's standards. The tale of Allo Allo presents an overarching question. How do we approach past entertainment that falls out of today's standards? Do we write them off as problematic relics, or do we realize and respect their context, imperfections, and successes? The fact is, Allo Allo was quite a product of its era, conceived in a time of fewer constraints, more willingness to sneer at the forbidden, and a national hunger for cheeky disrespect. Now, it would probably never be broadcast, but that does not diminish the delight it gave to millions or the impact it left upon comedy.